Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. As you can see, I sort of have a new setup. I got some new filming equipment for Christmas and I sort of decided to reorganize my bookshelves and all that good stuff. So sorry to switch up my setup on you again, but this is the new and improved version of that. And it's fitting because today we are going to be looking at a book that is different and refreshing and new. And that is The Forgetting Moon by Brian Lee Durfee, book 1 in the Five Warrior Angels trilogy. Now, The Forgetting Moon is a very large, epic, maybe even grimdark fantasy that takes place in the world of the Five Isles. And there are about 5 different nations: Sorcevier, Golconda, Windare, Valvalle, and there's one that I think I'm forgetting. But at the same time, Sorcevier is on its way to invade Golconda with a massive host led by the Angel Prince, Eros Rigel. I'm sorry if I'm saying any of these terms incorrectly. These are all fairly new, interesting names to pronounce, but I'll do my best. So Golconda is the last unconquered kingdom. Sorcevier has gone on a bunch of sort of conquests of the other nations and done their best to reclaim these nations for some sort of purpose that is being perpetuated, that these lands were stolen from them a very long time ago. But what you understand from the story is that that's not exactly the case, and there's a little bit more going on here than that. So Golconda is the last unconquered kingdom, and it is ruled by King Jovan Bronichel, who I think is fairly despicable. But he has 2 younger sisters, Jondrelin and Tala, and I absolutely love Jondrelin. And they are sort of right smack in the middle of uncomfortable political tensions and religious tensions, and the way that these 2 plots sort of interweave, and sort of the way that these themes are heavily hammered throughout the story is very interesting and very effective, and it's new. I think that was a bit refreshing to see sort of such a deep dive into religious conflicts, because I feel like there hasn't really been enough of that in the fantasy that I've been reading, and I really enjoy when there's this whole false religion plot going on, and you sort of have people on both sides of it who are trying to figure out what the truth is. And I think that that quest for the truth is probably one of the more compelling aspects of this story, and I really enjoyed it. In the kingdom, you have people who are sort of going through a religious identity crisis in a lot of ways, especially with Jondrelin, but you also have a young bastard boy named Nail who lives in the southern village of Gallows Haven. And Nail lives with his master, Shawcroft, who is sort of a mysterious, sort of, not devious, but he is very quiet. He is very reluctant to sort of divulge any information about his past with Nail. And it sort of made Nail feel alone and misunderstood, and he feels that he doesn't really know who he is, and he feels attached to these other people, but he also is feeling a bit unsure of himself and his life, where he came from, who his real parents are. And so he's stuck with Shawcroft doing all this work that he hates and being sort of bullied a lot by the local bully, Janko Brooke, who is the son of Baron Jubal Brooke. While Nail is sort of dealing with all these really difficult personal conflicts regarding his heritage, his relationship with Shawcroft, and the bullying that he faces from people in town, specifically Janko, right smack dab in the middle of this, Eros Rigel, the Angel Prince, who is coming to conquer Golconda, arrives in this village. It does not end well for the people of Gallows Haven, as you can probably figure out pretty easily. So this leads to a lot of questions about Nail's heritage and where he really came from, because this is sort of an inciting incident that happens about a third of the way through the book, I think, and it really just accelerates the plot. It really throws Nail's storyline into overdrive, because up to that point it was sort of slow and it was just kind of building up him as a character and sort of his relationship with Shawcroft, and sort of trying to understand who he was and what his conflicts were. But this really forces Nail to learn a lot about who he is, and I think that that was interesting to see how he answered these questions and how he faced and dealt with those answers. And something else that adds a bit of sort of tension to the plot is the fact that Sorcevier and Golconda have two completely different religions. They are rooted essentially in the same lore and texts, but the meanings and the interpretations behind these religions are extremely different, and sort of what that means is that they are put even more at odds with each other, and they have even less in common. In a way that makes them almost alien to each other, and I thought that that was a very interesting way of writing this, is how the would-be conqueror is completely different from the one who is supposed to be conquered. All the while this is going on in the capital, Amadon, Jondrelin and Tala are sort of facing very personal conflicts as well, maybe even larger than Nail's. Of course, they know who their parents are, and so they're not really having this sort of parental conflict and these questions about their heritage, anything like that. But they are dealing with living under the umbrella, the shadow, if you will, of an abusive older brother, the king. And I think that the abuse that King Jovan inflicts upon Jondrelin is a very familiar sort of presentation of this, and I found it kind of hard to read at times because I really cared about Jondrelin, and I found her plot, her storyline very compelling in this book, and I really can't wait to see what else Mr. Durfee does with her in the future, because I found her very fierce, but she was also sort of questioning. The more she learns, the more she questions, and I found her character very interesting, and I really enjoyed all of her scenes. I don't think that there were any that actually dragged for me, but unfortunately, I can't say the same about Tala. I wasn't very interested in her storyline. She's a bit younger than Jondrelin, about 10 years younger, and I wasn't really interested in her plot, but unfortunately, it's so central to the story, and there's so many sort of revelations that you find out through her storyline that you kind of have to deal with it. I don't think she was a bad character, I just wasn't anywhere near as interested in her as I was in Jondrelin specifically, or even Nail. And so to sort of go along with her chapters, it wasn't as near as entertaining or compelling to me as it was to watch Nail sort of progress and to watch Jondrelin sort of go further into this rebellion almost against Joven. I think that there are a lot of things that you find out and a lot of characters that you meet through Tala that could potentially be very interesting, but at the moment I'm not very taken with any of them, and not Tala either. But from what I've heard, that she does get better in the second book, and that there's more development for her. So I am looking forward to that. She's not a bad character, I just want to reiterate. She's just not my favorite. So one of my favorite things about this book, since we're going to get back to the positives here, is the writing style. I've heard some people complain about info dumps, exposition, things like that. But the thing is, I only had that problem maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the whole page time. And considering this book is 763 pages, I think that that's a pretty small number. I think that's a pretty good ratio, all things considered. And I really, really enjoyed the prose style. It felt very polished, very developed. It felt accessible without being very bare bones and not really describing anything. There's a lot of description here, and that is what I tend to lean towards in terms of taste and personal preference. And I think that if you have problems with the occasional exposition dump, then this may be a bit difficult to get through at times, but I didn't really have that problem. In fact, I found the lore for this world, for the country, for each person to be very sort of intriguing, and I really liked the dynamics of the religion and its worshippers, and sort of the very different presentation of the religious conversations and tensions in this book. And I think a lot of that is connected to these exposition dumps. But I found those interesting, and I think that sometimes Durfee takes some time to explain some things that may otherwise be confusing, and I think that that does help, and I think that does sort of further accelerate the reader's understanding, which is very helpful. It's very helpful for me. I feel like I retained a lot more information with this book than I have with other books that don't have this same sort of writing style. So I am absolutely so thankful for that, for Mr. Durfee's really beautiful writing style. It wasn't flowery, it wasn't what you'd call purple prose, but it was very descriptive and very well developed. I think that there was a very, very clear presentation of its description, and I really, really think that this was an amazing writing style that I thoroughly enjoyed. It was probably one of my favorite parts, aside from my 2 favorite characters, Nail and Jondrelin. But that was definitely one of the better parts of the book. Something I really thoroughly enjoyed about this book that doesn't even really have anything to do with the content inside is the amazing Richard Anderson cover with the incredibly unique font that I've never seen before. And I actually really like it. It's so bold, and it really emphasizes the epicness. Is that a word? I'm using it. I think that the way this book is presented really emphasizes the epic nature of the content within it, and I think that it's easy to overlook that. And I mean, it's not easy to overlook the big ass font on the cover, but it is easy to overlook its influence and its importance to the story. I think that it correlates very well with the large epic content within the book. I very, very much enjoyed this book, and I am so excited to pick up the sequel, The Blackest Heart, in January. I am absolutely loving this series so far. I have very few gripes, very few criticisms with this first book, and I think that it really knocked it out of the park. Durfee really knows what he's doing, and it's very, very clear that even though The setting is sort of typical of more modern fantasy books, European medieval setting. That's okay. I think that his presentation of it and the execution of many of the themes and messages and the character work within this book really distinguish it from many other medieval European stories, and I found it to be a very compelling, beautifully written book. I'm really thrilled that I got to read this book when I did. I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to fit it in this month, but this is something I really wanted to read, and so I sort of blew through it in a couple of days. And this is a book that I definitely think I would reread. All of the positives and negatives considered, I would love to have the honor to rate this book 9 out of 10. Honestly, the only thing that stopped me from picking up the sequel was reading Sentinel in the Sense, which I'm more than fine with. But I am so glad that I was able to read this book, and thank you to Mr. Durfee for supporting the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you'll like, comment, subscribe, and I would love to talk about this book in the comments. And I hope that you don't forget to pick up The Forgetting Moon by Brian Lee Durfee.